Okay, today we're going to be studying the production possibilities frontier. It's a bit of a tricky tool, so we're going to take this a little bit more in depth than the other decision-making tool we studied. Remember, we used the paced decision-making tool when we were trying to determine what was that activity, what problem were we trying to solve? Think about your blue sheet. And again, we're looking at this tool, and we're looking at the production possibilities frontier tool, because again, economics is about the study of how people make decisions in the face of scarcity, in the face of unlimited wants, but limited resources. So every country has a fixed amount of resources available to them. And a production possibilities frontier is a tool that economists use to try and figure out what they're going to do with those limited resources that each country has. So in your study guide, you'll want to find this spot. The production possibilities frontier is a graphic representation showing all of the possible combinations of two goods when an economy is producing at full potential. Okay, it could also be two services, two goods or services. When an economy is producing at full potential, that goes in your study guide. So we also want to keep in mind that these decisions of these that the production possibilities frontier represent ultimately are a direct reflection of our values. All our decisions that we make are a reflection of our values, what we consider to be important, what we consider to be essential. So we can use this meme as an example. The person who put this meme together obviously was upset about his friend's values and what his friend considered to be the most important priority, as evidenced in the way he spent his money. So this person believed from what his friend did that his friend valued what more than anything. And the person that put this meme together believed that his friend valued what the least. Okay. It's another meme to show this understanding that our choices are a direct reflection of our values. When people tell me to stop spending money on clothes, I obviously can't curb that habit, so I'm just going to give less to charity. So the person who put this meme together showed us in a vivid way that this person values which more importantly, more highly, looking fashionable or helping those who are in need. So we take this concept of our choices reflecting our values even further when we look at this expression, economic expression, guns or butter. You'll hear this a lot in political debate, etc. It's an expression that economists use to demonstrate the relationship in a nation's investment in military goods and services versus civilian goods and services. So it doesn't literally mean guns, doesn't literally mean butter. Guns is an expression to represent all the money a country uses on security and force. So police, TSA, FBI, CIA, Marines, Navy, Air Force, etc. That is all what is used with the nickname guns. And then butter represents all of the spending a country makes, not just the government, but the country as a whole, the economy as a whole, how much money is being spent and how much is being invested in civilian goods. So things like education, healthcare, how much of the economy is represented with healthcare and food, housing, infrastructure, roads, telephone lines, etc. Those are the things that are nicknamed as butter in this expression, guns or butter. So we're going to use this expression, guns or butter, on our PPF to start with. But before we do, take a look at this cartoon, and you decide, the artist, we're not saying that this is a fact, but the artist sees the main character of this, I believe, is a representation of Bush Jr. 2002, yes, probably Bush Jr. What is he saying about President Bush the second, if you will? What are his priorities according to the artist? Guns or butter? Okay, so we're going to use this guns or butter expression, meaning security spending and investment versus civilian needs spending and assessment, excuse me, and infrastructure, etc. Also, make sure that you're mindful of where the 0 is on this graph. As you move this direction, of course, we're talking about numbers going higher. As we move this direction, we're talking going higher for butter. And as we move this direction, we're talking about numbers going higher for guns. So let's take this further. So at this point, how many, remember, this is 0. This here is 0. Point. How many units of guns are being produced? At this point, right, and also at this point, how many units of butter are being produced? Okay. And if a country, this is a fictional country, Alpha, if a country truly did set their production point here, meaning absolutely nothing that they're spending on infrastructure, absolutely nothing the country is spending on food, clothing, healthcare, etc., what would that tell us about the values of that country? Alternatively, how many units of guns are being produced here? How many units of butter are being produced at this point? And again, the decision to produce at this point would indicate what about that country's values. If they spent no money whatsoever on keeping themselves safe and secure, and all their money on civilian goods, what would that tell us? Now, usually a point is chosen where both items, whatever the thing is, are being produced on a PPF. So we can see at this point how many units of guns are being produced? How many units of butter are being produced? And then, again, we see values always reflected in the choices that we make. The decision to produce at this point would indicate what about the country Alpha's values? Now, we must understand that the frontier, the whole point of the frontier, the meaning of this frontier, of this curve, is it shows us the limit of what can be produced, all possible combinations when all resources are fully utilized, meaning this is the most this country can produce. Any point along here is the most it can produce, and it simply is incapable of doing more than this. There isn't enough infrastructure, there isn't enough education, there isn't enough population, there isn't enough oil, or whatever the case may be. They simply do not have the resources to go beyond this frontier, this PPF. So, we want to add to our vocabulary. Go ahead and get your study guide again. You want to get to the vocabulary word that's, it has a blank and says production. This is unattainable production. And unattainable production is defined as even if all current resources in the country were fully employed, this level of production is impossible. Okay, it can't be done. Remember, we said this is the limit. So this spot right here can't be done. This amount of butter, this amount of guns put together at the same time can't be done. Okay. So then the next part in your study guide you want to fill in is the efficient production. Efficient production is any point on that production possibilities frontier. on this curve. Anywhere on the curve, on the frontier, is efficient production, meaning they're doing the absolute most that they possibly can. They're producing the most they possibly can in the country. And so efficient production means that, and this goes in your study guide, all resources are being fully employed to produce the most goods and services possible. That's what efficient production means in terms of economics. Therefore, it's impossible to produce more of one item without producing less of the other. And we'll get into those trade-offs in a minute. And then lastly, inefficient production is any point inside this area of the curve. Remember, impossible out here, unattainable out here. Any point on the curve is efficient, but anywhere inside this area is inefficient. Meaning, and this goes in your study guide, not all resources are being fully employed. It's still possible to increase production of both goods. You could increase production of guns and increase production of butter if you were at this point B. So your production is set at an inefficient level. And this level of production is usually the sort of thing that results from a recession. You may have a bunch of people who are unemployed. That's inefficient. You have those resources of those people and they're not being utilized. So that's an inefficient level. During a recession, you have resources, factories that are not in use, and land that is not being cultivated. That's inefficient production. The resources of the country are not being fully utilized. Okay. Now, let's practice this a bit. If production were set at 2 units of leather jackets and 4 units of computers, would that be efficient, inefficient, or unattainable production? Keeping in mind that this is the production possibilities frontier, or the production possibilities curve. Okay, next question. If the production quota were set at 8 units of computers and 2 units of leather jackets, would that be an efficient, inefficient, or unattainable production level? If production were set at 2 units of computers and 5 units of leather jackets, would that be efficient, inefficient, or unattainable production level? If production were set at 6 units of leather jackets and 14 units of computers, would that be efficient, inefficient, or unattainable? What if production levels were set at 3 units of leather jackets and 4 units of computers? Would that be efficient, inefficient, or unattainable? And lastly, what if production were set at 3 units of leather jackets and 8 units of computers? Would that be efficient, inefficient, or unattainable production level? Okay, moving on. Now, keep in mind the production possibilities frontier doesn't really show reality, since it assumes that only 2 goods are produced by a country, which never happens. You never only produce 2 goods in a country, no matter how small the country. It's a simplification that shows what sort of trade-offs would be made in reality when a country decides to produce more of one good or service and less of another. And so let's make sure we understand what trade-offs are. This goes in your study guide. Trade-off is the exchange of one thing for another of more or less equal value. Okay, so here we have milk, butter, more or less equal value, and we look at the trade-off between them, but that'll make more sense in a second. So the PPF can be used to show trade-offs. Any 2 or more points on the frontier represent trade-offs. If alpha country decided to set production point at point A, how many units of guns would they be choosing to produce? How many units of butter would they be choosing to produce? Now, let's look at the trade-off. What if Alpha Country decided to shift production from point A to point B? Would they be trading off a loss of guns for a gain of butter? Or would they be trading off a loss of butter for a gain of guns? What does B represent in relation to A? Okay, so moving from A to B represents a trade-off to gain more butter, which you of course lose some guns in the trade-off. Moving from B to A represents a trade-off to gain more guns, but of course at the loss of butter. So let's practice this. Trading off what for what? If we move from point B to point E, what is traded off for what? If we move from point D to point G, what is being traded off for what? And if we move from G to A, what is being traded off for what? Now, not only can the PDF be used to show trade-offs, it can also demonstrate the opportunity cost of those trade-offs. Now let's review what opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the value of the best alternative that you did not choose. So, when moving from point A to point B, what is decreasing? Again, this is review. What's decreasing? Guns or butter by moving from A to B? We're losing guns. So, the opportunity cost of shifting production from A to B equals the decrease in guns. So how much were guns decreased? They were decreased by 600 units. That means the opportunity cost of moving from A to B is 600 units. That is the opportunity cost. 600 units of guns. Now, let's try this again. Oops. When moving from point B to point A, what is decreasing? Guns or butter by moving from B to A? Butter is decreasing. So, the opportunity cost of shifting production from point B to point A equals the decrease in butter. So, what is the opportunity cost of going from B to A? How much butter is lost? The opportunity cost is 1,100 units of butter. That's the opportunity cost of moving from B to A. So let's practice this. What is the opportunity cost of moving from point B to point C on this curve? First of all, you got to make sure, okay, what is going down? Is the number by moving, how many computers are being produced at B? How many leather jackets are being produced at B? Okay, now if we move to C, how many computers are being produced at C? How many leather jackets are being produced at C? Which went up and which went down? And how much did that go down? When we moved from B to C, how many units of computers did we lose by moving from B to C? We lost 2 units of computers. That's the opportunity cost. Let's try this again. What is the opportunity cost of moving from production point E to production point C? What is the opportunity cost? What is the opportunity cost of moving from point A to point E? And what is the opportunity cost of moving production from point G to point D? Lastly, the PPF can also show economic development by moving outward. Economic development can occur due to additional resources discovered. Maybe oil is discovered. Increase in education. If a country invests in a lot of education, maybe they start increasing the number of scholarships they give, or maybe they give free university tuition. This will improve their economic development. Maybe they increase the population. Maybe they invent some major new technology. Any one of these things could cause the PPF to move outward. In other words, the more someone is educated, let's say the population generally has become more educated, then we have more people working on either developing weapons that are more accurate or weapons that are smarter, if you will, or in the same token, you have more educated people, so you have more people studying on how to cure cancer. You have this higher level of education all around, and you're going to see your possibilities. Remember, this is production possibilities. You're going to see your possibilities increase. Same with oil. You end up with much more oil. You can use energy at higher rates. Again, you'll be able to produce at higher rates with that available. So sometimes this curve itself can shift, and it'll be due to some of these reasons here. So it's able to show economic development as well. Now go ahead and get started on the worksheets to illustrate whether or not you really understand these concepts. Good luck.